Hey guys, welcome to another virtual crafty program. Today we're going to talk about tie-dye. Most people think of the 60s when they think about tie-dye, but recently it's come back into fashion. I myself am a very big fan of tie-dye. I have several pieces of clothing in my wardrobe that are tie-dye, and some of them I have made myself. Tie-dye is a form of resist dyeing. This means that part of what you dye resists the dye, and that's what forms the pattern. What you do is you fold, twist, or pleat something that you want to dye. Usually it's a t-shirt or some other piece of clothing, but you can also tie-dye shoes or a bag or something else, and then tying it into whatever shape you want before you add the dye. That's why it's called tie-dye. The thicker areas created when you add folds to your item resist absorbing any dye, while everything else takes in the dye and the pigment soaks into the fabric and stays once you set it. This makes some really awesome abstract patterns, and you can also add symmetrical shapes into your patterns, and we're actually going to do that with one of our shirts we make later. So what do you need in order to start tie-dyeing? Well, you need something to dye. I'm going to use t-shirts. Then you need dye. You can buy individual colors either in powder form or in liquid form, or you can get a kit. I'm going to use a kit from Tulip called Tie-Dye Party, and it came in this really nifty case, and it had at least 2 of most of the colors, and you can get these at like Walmart or Joann's or Hobby Lobby, and I'm pretty sure mine came from Joann's. You'll need something to tie your items once you've got them set the way you want them. I used the rubber bands that came with the kit in this tutorial, but in hindsight, I think I would have been happier if I had used something like twine or maybe something like really strong dental floss that doesn't have any coating on it. You'll need access to running water. You want to make sure it's cool water because you don't want to add any extra heat in the process, and we'll talk more about that later. At the end of the process, you need a washer and a dryer because you're going to have to wash your items. You also might want to use an iron in order to heat set the dye in the fabric. This is optional. You don't need to do it. I did not do it, and we'll talk more about heat setting later. You need something to protect your hands from the dye. Once you've got your gloves and all your other supplies, you're good to go. The first thing you're going to need to do is soak all of your items. You want to make sure they're damp when you add the dye so that it spreads well. Adding dye to dry fabric doesn't really work that great. A quick note, you guys will notice that I use this tub when I need water a lot. I'm not using the tub because that's the best way to do it. I'm using it so that you guys can see what I'm doing. The best thing to do would be to use running water. So you would want to use a water hose or do this in your bathroom if you have the big enough space there. Once you've soaked everything, make sure you wring it out before you try adding dye. If it's dripping wet, that means it's saturated completely with liquid. And if it's completely saturated with liquid, then it doesn't have any more room to take in the dye. So you do want it to be wet or damp, but you don't want it to be completely soaked. A quick note, don't set up your dye until right before you're ready to dye. So if you're doing a big batch like I am, wait until everything is folded and secured the way you want it before you make your dye. The dye I'm using is powdered dye. That's usually what comes in the kits. And if you add the water to the powder and activate the dye and let it sit too long, it'll lose its potency and the colors won't be quite as vibrant as they could be. If you let it sit for a really long time, say a day or so, then it could just turn into pretty colored water and you won't get any pigmentation once you add it to fabric. The first items that you're going to see are these 2 black t-shirts. What we're going to do first is something called reverse dyeing. Reverse dyeing is when you take something really dark colored, I'm using these 2 black t-shirts like I said earlier, and you add bleach to them. Most people will just let the bleach on the dark fabric be their tie-dye pattern, but I'm going to add color to my t-shirts. If you do want to add dye to your t-shirts, make sure you really oversaturate the t-shirts. And make sure that all of the bleach is completely rinsed out of the t-shirts before you add your dye in, otherwise it'll kind of negate the dye. The first pattern we're going to do is just a really simple crumple pattern. You'll see me use these racks in these little pans with the shirts on top. I'm using these so that when I add any dye or bleach, it will drip off of the shirt and into the pan. It kind of helps contain the mess, and it also helps keep the colors where I want them. So if I want a shirt to be pink and blue, I can dye it pink and blue, and then I can add another shirt to the rack and dye that shirt green and yellow, and I won't have to worry about getting any of the pink and blue on my green and yellow shirt because all of the dye has dripped into the pan. It's not sitting on my table. The next pattern that we're going to do is the classic swirl pattern. So what you want to do is lay out your shirt and pinch the middle of the shirt and then just kind of twist it like you were winding up a music box or winding up an old clock. Some people will use a fork when they do this. I find that's not really necessary, but it is very fun. So you can try that as well. Once you have everything secured, you can see that I have used rubber bands on my t-shirt. Now, I had a really hard time using the rubber bands on this shirt. It probably would have been easier to use string or twine, so I do recommend that, especially for this particular spiral pattern, but you can do it. Once you have everything secure the way you want it, you can add your bleach. I'm just using regular old bleach in an old bottle that I had, and I poked a hole in top so that it would work kind of like a makeshift squirt bottle, and I could just throw it away and I wouldn't have to worry about contaminating anything. Make sure you really saturate the shirts with bleach. You want the bleach to do as much as it possibly can to lighten up that fabric. When I'm done with that, I'm going to sit the shirts in the sunshine. It's not necessary to sit them in direct sunlight, but the sunlight helps the bleach. Sunlight has a natural bleaching quality. You might hear your grandmother talk about when she was young and she would add peroxide or lemon juice to her hair and then go sit outside and tan, and it would bleach her hair blonde. Please don't do this. It's really bad for your hair. You can also see the natural bleaching properties of sunlight if you had a book or a picture sitting in a place where sun can hit it from a window. After a while, it will fade. The rest of the stuff I'm going to show you how to dye. We don't need to do anything special to, just fold it into the pattern that we want. This next shirt I'm going to do what's called a bullseye pattern. You can see I'm going to circle with my finger where I want the bullseye to originate. I really like the way that the bullseye pattern looks when it's done originating from one of the corners of the shirts. For this one, I'm going to do the shoulder. So what you want to do is lay your shirt out flat and pinch kind of around the center of where you want your first bullseye to be, and then just pick up the shirt and smooth it into a long tube. Then you want to secure it with rubber bands or twine. This next shirt is going to be another classic spiral. Next, we're going to try what was called the honeycomb pattern. Now, I absolutely adored this when I saw it. So what you need to do is lay your shirt out flat, get a old shoestring, and then roll your shirt up with the shoestring. I did my shirt so that the bottom was in the center and the top was in the outside. This will make sure that the dye is mostly concentrated on the shoulders of the shirt, and it will fade as it gets down to the bottom of the shirt. If you put the bottom of the shirt on the outside of the roll, then it will fade upwards. Once you've rolled up the shirt, scrunch it up as tight as you can get it, and then tie the ends together and make a little shirt donut. Make sure that if you've done it the way I have and the sleeves are on the outside, you kind of fold them back in there so that they aren't just kind of one solid color. You want them to still be part of the pattern. Next, we're going to do another scrunch shirt, but this one we're going to use a method on later called watercolor tie-dye. This shirt is just going to get a simple accordion fold. I'm just going to fold the shirt diagonally in little accordion folds, and you can see I'm not being super careful about it. I'm just going to fold it and rubber band it kind of randomly. So this next shirt we're going to add a bit of a pattern to. You can add shapes in your tie-dye as long as they're symmetrical. So you can do what I'm doing and do a star, or you could do something like a butterfly or a ladybug, or really whatever you can find that you like that's symmetrical. What you're going to need to do is fold the shirt directly down the middle. Make sure that you line up the collar of the shirt really well, and you line up the seams on the sleeves and the sleeves themselves so that it doesn't look crooked and the pattern turns out well. You can freehand your shape onto your shirt if you like, but I'm not very good at drawing stars, so I had a star printed out and I had my assistant cut out the pattern for me while I folded the shirt. And if you are having some difficulties with your wet shirt not wanting to lay flat, you can use the edge of the table like I did and the weight of the wet shirt to kind of smooth everything out. Once you've got your stencil, outline it on the shirt. I used a pencil and it wasn't very dark, so I had to switch over to a pen so you guys could see it. Make sure you line up your stencil with with the edge of the fabric, you can see me pressing it down really well, and that's because I was pressing it into the wet shirt so that the dampness would seep up through the paper and kind of hold it in place for me, kind of like a really weak makeshift glue. Once you've done it, you want to take the top corner and fold it over to the middle corner, and so it lays nice and flat, and make sure you smooth everything out. Then you're going to pinch up the other star and fold it so that the middle of that point meets the middle of the other point. Then you want to make sure everything is nice and smooth, and you're going to have kind of like a pizza slice, and then you're going to fold that in half. Make sure again that everything is nice and smooth, that you don't want any unforeseen wrinkles messing up your star. Turn it over so that you can see the line left by your pattern, and then you want to fold along that line as best you can. You want to rubber band along that line. Once you fold it along that line, you can then fold everything else the way you like it. That one line is what's going to really define your pattern. So make sure that whatever you use, rubber bands or string or twine, you tie it nice and tight so that the dye can't get under it. You can just dye that one little bit if you like, or you can add more rubber bands to your t-shirt. What I did was, since the end was already pinched up into a bit of a point, I did a few rubber bands around the bottom like I would if I was doing a bullseye pattern. Then I spread out the bottom of the shirt and did a little bit of a crumple pattern. And ironically, the shirt ended up looking a bit like a swan, which was very fun. Now, I did do a few more items than you've seen so far, but unfortunately, my memory card ran out of space in the middle of filming, so I had to cut out most of those in order to make sure that I could show you guys the whole dyeing process. So you may see those off to the side every now and again, and I do have pictures of the finished products for you to see at the end, but just keep that in mind. Now that we have folded all of our items into the patterns that we want, we need to set up our dye. The dye that came with my kit is powdered, and it came in these really awesome squeeze bottles with colored caps. There should be instructions on the dye bottles as well as in the kit for however your dye is meant to be activated. This dye is pretty simple to activate. I just have to fill it up to the line on the back with water. So now we get to the fun part, actually adding the dye. Now, you'll see me kind of checking the folds in the shirt. That's me trying to make sure it's completely saturated. And even though I did that, it still came out kind of washed out. Make sure you add lots of dye to the darker colored shirts. Once you've added the dye, put it in a plastic bag or wrap it in saran wrap and let it sit for at least 8 hours. I let mine sit overnight. This one actually got added into the wash the first go around with some detergent, so nearly all of the color washed out. With this one, we're going to do a method called watercolor dye. What you want to do is crumple up the shirt and then add the colors you want. You don't want to get them too terribly close together. You'll see that I'm just kind of sprinkling and dotting it. Once you've got all the colors you want on there, add ice and then carefully move it to the side. The ice will melt and slowly spread the dye so that it blends together the different colors, and it looks really amazing when it's done. This is the star shirt that we did earlier, and the person that it's going to really likes red and black, so I'm trying to make a red and black gradient. You'll see me rinse it out a bit in water, and that's so that I can make the dye bleed into the fabric I haven't dyed yet and make a really nice gradient. Now, I absolutely adore kind of washed out patterns, so I'm going to dip this shirt in water, and it's going to kind of wash out some of the dye and make it look kind of faded. This is our bullseye shirt. It's going to be another rainbow shirt. Each individual section is going to be a different color, and at those rubber bands is going to form a circle. Make sure you dye the front and the back side of your shirt, otherwise you won't have a pattern on one side. So this next shirt is the honeycomb shirt. What I wanted with this one was for it to be multi-tones of blue and a little bit of teal and black. So I'm going to use the black dye, the dark blue dye, the medium to light blue dye, and the teal dye. I'm going to go ahead and add my dark and light blues and then dunk it in the water so that they blend together and so that the layers in the middle of the roll saturate a little bit. Then I'm going to add the teal and the black, and I'm adding the black to where I think the shoulders are going to be so that it will fade from dark to light. If you're doing this pattern, make sure that you get the inside of your little t-shirt donut so that you don't end up with blank spots or weird stripes on your shirt. After you've let everything sit overnight, you need to rinse out the leftover dye. I'm demonstrating with my trusty bucket of water, and you can see that there's still quite a lot of dye left in this shirt. It would be best to do this in running water. You want to run the water over the shirt until the water runs clear. Then you want to put the shirt in the washer with hot water and no detergent. I really want to reiterate how important it is not to put detergent in when you first wash your shirts. Why am I emphasizing this so much? Because I did it. I reflexively put in detergent with my first batch of tie-dye shirts. And sadly, it also included the batch that had my watercolor shirt in it. And it completely washed out most of the dye in the watercolor shirt, which made me really sad because it looked amazing before it went in the wash. It also included that blue shirt that you saw earlier. Thankfully, I completely oversaturated the shirt, so it didn't ruin it. And actually, I'm really happy with how it turned out. But make sure you don't add detergent to your wash. You want to wash it in really hot water and then dry it on the highest heat setting possible to set in your dye. If you really want to be extra sure that the dye is set, you can go over it with an iron on high heat after you've dried it. Once you've washed everything and dried it, then that's it. You are done with your tie-dye adventure. And I'm really happy with how a lot of these turned out. The star looks awesome and my swirl shirts are amazing. I have worn my blue honeycomb shirt and my swirl rainbow shirt so many weekends since I've done this, and they have been washed several times and the colors still look great. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you guys get out there and do some tie-dye, and I hope you guys share with us what you do. I would love to see it. But that's it for this video. Don't worry though, I'll have more for you soon.